Everyone, as you can see, it is Friday, and yes, wearing my mini ears, so we are going to talk about another Disney film and comparing it to the original source material. Now, this one in particular is going to be interesting because it's actually two source materials that we're working with, because we are talking about the adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. Now, this movie is, again, one of the more older Disney movies. However, I did skip over another few theatrical releases, and I'll sort of explain my reasoning as to why I would skip these particular ones. After Bambi, there was Saludos Amigos, then Three Caballeros, then Make My Music, then Fun and Fancy Free, then Melody Time. Most of those particular ones did not follow really a original work, and most of them were sort of inspiration drawn from Fantasia, and by using animation as a means of experimenting. I think this was a time when Disney was trying to kind of capture the essence a little bit of Fantasia, while at the same time trying to incorporate things through animation. And I think it was sort of a time when Disney was just kind of experimenting and wasn't really focusing on trying to tell stories so much. So Ichabod, or The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, was the first step in Disney trying to cover more back into storytelling, going back to sort of the original narrative, so to speak, or taking a story and using it. So, having that being said, without further ado, let us talk about The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. Now, what you need to understand is that these two stories are separate. So, The Adventures of Ichabod, or what it's based upon, is the book by Washington Irving called The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and then the Mr. Toad part is from another original work called The Wind in the Willows. And you will realize this when you do watch the Disney version. They will tell you what book it's based upon. Now, let us start with The Wind in the Willows, or the Mr. Toad section of this particular film, because this is the one that comes up first. This is the first story in this Disney film. So, from what I could gather is that the story in the original work is very different. The Disney version focuses more on Toad's obsession and its conflicts with the law, which again is addressed in the book as well, but it just does it in a different way. In the Disney version, there's a big sort of trial, where Toad is put on trial, and he's found guilty for technically a crime he didn't really commit necessarily. However, to say that he's free from flaws and free from struggles and temptations is obviously not true, because he does still suffer that mania that is talked about in the book and emphasized, on how at one point he's obsessed with the caravan, the horse-drawn caravan, which is clearly illustrated in the book, and also his obsession with motor cars, which is addressed in the Disney version as well as in the book too. So, for the most part, his character is pretty much the same. As far as the other characters go, for the most part, all the other characters are the same. You still have Ratty, you still have Mole, who also come into play. And you also have Badger. Except, I think in the original work he's just called Badger, but I think the Disney version tends to call him Mick Badger. Maybe that just sounds better, I'm not sure. But they do kind of play that same role in trying to help Toad get out of the obsession that he's in. But again, the plots are very significantly different. So, instead of focusing on this trial, which the Disney version does focus on and does address, the book does not have a trial whatsoever. For the most part, the book starts out with Mole meeting Ratty by the river, and Ratty basically takes Mole on a rowboat because he's really passionate about the river and around where he lives. And in the Disney version, Ratty and Mole already kind of know each other. It starts off with like Mole taking the rowboat and going across the river to go to Ratty's house. So for the most part, and their names coincide with like with the animal that they are. So Mr. Toad is a toad. Ratty's a rat. Mole is a mole. Badger's a badger. It's all the same. So it's clearly indicated what these characters sort of represent. But again, as I will continue on, this book tries to emphasize, I think, different plot points. So not only do we start off with that, unlike in the Disney version where they already know each other, we see that Toad has this caravan already. In the Disney version, he doesn't. He gets the caravan sort of on his own, and McBadger is already kind of in the scene where in the Disney version where he's introduced and presented. So for the most part, Badger doesn't come to play into book later on, but the thing being is that since Ratty knows Toad, and then Mole knows Ratty, that's how they kind of come all together. And then Toad, having this caravan, persuades the Rat and the Mole to go with him on his adventure, which again is really emphasized in the Disney version as well as in the original work, that Toad likes to have like these little adventures where he takes his obsession and he does something crazy. And as they're all going on this adventure, three of them, unlike in the Disney version where they're trying to persuade him, to give up the obsession, they kind of just go along with it in the beginning of the original work. And in the original work, he encounters the motor car like he kind of does in the Disney version, and, the caravan crashes kind of like in the Disney version as well, and then he suddenly becomes obsessed with motor cars. Toad is no longer interested in caravans. He suddenly wants a motor car. So that basically happens. But then Mole, later on, as the tale kind of progresses, Mole decides to go to Badger. And I think he wants to do this because he's probably seeing what Toad's doing and thinks that this is kind of a little outrageous. And since Badger, in this case, because we're talking about the original work, is in a particular spot, he has to go and find him, and he encounters many dangers along the way. Ratty's the one who tells him, don't go, don't bother. But Mole goes anyway, and Ratty realizes that when Mole is gone and tries to find him. And then once they find each other, they end up stumbling upon the house where McBadger lives. And then basically they lay out what Toad has the things that Toad has been doing to McBadger. Like basically that he crashed 6 cars, has been hospitalized 3 times, and has spent fortune on fines. So they're kind of laying this all down to the Badger, and then all 3 of them come to the conclusion that they should help Toad. And the best way to do this, which again they do in the Disney version as well, is that they put him on house arrest, so that they try to get him off of his obsession, or of his crazy obsessions. And But then Toad escapes, like in the Disney version, and steals a car, and is caught and is sent to prison. In the Disney version, it's played out a little bit differently. In the Disney version, Toad is sort of innocent. He didn't really steal anything. He makes sure that he kind of paid his due, and he gets wrongly accused. Whereas in this version, literally, Toad is basically just a criminal who can't control his obsessions with things. So, there's that kind of personality difference, I guess you could say. And then, as he's stealing this car, he gets caught by the police and sent to jail, unlike in the Disney version where they find him guilty in a trial and then he's put to jail. And there he encounters a jailer's daughter, and the jailer's daughter is willing to disguise him as, I believe it's called a washerwoman, which is kind of similar to the Disney version, but the Disney version has another character who is basically a horse, and the horse was the one that was drawn by the caravan, and he plays a role too into trying to getting Toad out, because I think he kind of shares that same adventurous spirit as he does, and he finds Toad probably a lot of fun, so he basically just gives him a disguise, and the disguise is of like an old lady. They just kind of say, yeah, it's an old lady. They're not really specific on the disguise so much, but in the Disney version, he basically, this horse just tells him, yeah, just disguise yourself and then you can, well, be free. But in the original work, it's just this jailer's daughter character who basically just gives him a disguise and then he escapes. And then in the original work, Toad hitches a ride on a train, and then he comes across a horse-drawn barge. The owner offers him a lift in exchange for Toad's services as a washerwoman, because again, he still has that disguise on in the original version. And then as he's trying to do his chore for the owner, so he can have, or so that he pays his debt for the car, he gets into a fight with a barge woman who deliberately tosses him in the canal. However, he manages to get the barge horse, which he later sells to a gypsy. And then Toad flags down a passing car, which happens to be the very one which he stole earlier. The car owners permit him to drive their car. Once his true identity is discovered, he flees again and ends up at Ratty's house. So we're kind of seeing a correlation now between the Disney and the original work. All the things that I've been telling you is literally in the original work, but Toad's escape is a lot different in the Disney work. Once Toad escapes, he goes on a train, which I believe he does in the original version. Once he gets out, he goes on a train, and then he ends up encountering a horse-drawn barge, and then he suddenly wants that. So, in the Disney version, he does go on, like, a train at some point, but he's chased by the police, and then he eventually ends up at Ratty's house, but it's all of these other plot points that I've been showing you, like with selling the horse barge and all those things are not addressed at all in the Disney version. He basically just kind of escapes and then shows up at Ratty's house. It's kind of like that they kind of skipped all of that stuff over and just went straight to where he goes to Ratty's house. Now, this is interesting because if you know the Disney version, there's like a trial, and when Toad is found guilty, even though he technically wasn't guilty because he did forge a sort of deed, and this deed said that he would give up Toad Hall. Now, Toad Hall is basically where Toad lives. Toad is a very rich guy. He has a lot of money, and that's why he's able to go out and do all these things. So, he basically, trades that for the motor car in the Disney version. Because he's so obsessed with motor cars, he wants a motor car, so he trades his house for a motor car. And then once that deed is converged, and once that agreement is reached, there's this other character in the Disney version whose name is Mr. Winky, and he's basically the leader of the weasels, and the original work has weasels too, but it also has stoats and ferrets. But in the Disney version, it mainly suggests weasels, and that weasels technically own the car. But Mr. Winky, I guess, is in charge of all of these weasels in the Disney version, and he witnesses the deed, and he basically takes Toad Hall for himself. And you'll see that, and then he tells, though, in the trial that that never really, what really happened never really took place, and he said that Toad was basically trying to sell him a stolen motor car. And basically turns on him. So, yeah, that's how basically the Disney version plays out. In the original, there's a mentioning of some kind of leader, but it's not really emphasized, I think, so much in the book. However, Toad Hall is taken over. It's just taken over in different ways. In the original work, it's just taken over by weasels, ferrets, and stoats. And in the Disney version, it's taken over by a leader, or a human being, I should say, because this is a world where there are animals and there are humans. So the human, Mr. Winky, is in charge of all the weasels. And he basically takes over. So there's that really big concrete difference. It's not just a takeover. Like, the Disney version actually tries to explain, like, yeah, there's this deed, and this makes it so that they can take it over. And basically in the original version, they're just, since the only people that are really guarding Toad Hall are the three, Ratty, Mole, and Badger, they kind of get driven out by the weasels, stoats, and ferrets because they have bigger numbers. And so that's basically how it explains that point in the original work. And in the same way, once all of this is sort of revealed to Toad about, the Toad Hall being taken over, the three of them, the McBadger, who ends up showing up later, and Mole, who basically are the ones to tell Toad and Ratty that it's basically, we can't control Toad Hall anymore. We need to go and, fight back. That's when it kind of coincides with the Disney version, because in order to do this, they go through like a tunnel, and it's kind of similar in the Disney version where they're trying to go underground to find a weak point, where the weasels are basically guarding their Toad Hall, is kind of like their territory. And basically what happens is, they attack, and they are able to take Toad Hall for themselves. Whereas the Disney version, it's more of not like pushing people out so much as it is capturing that deed, because that deed basically states everything, and the fact that Toad was innocent in the first place. So, again, there's that kind of big difference, and I think Disney wanted to kind of make it more of a concrete plot. Because, again, it kind of, the way the story plays out, it kind of doesn't really make sense how these three can, just upload a bunch of weapons and then just decide, okay, we're going to go and we're going to fight these weasels and whatnot. But, again, it is like one of those kids' stories. But in the end, Toad ends up succeeding, as well as with his friends, and but for the most part, what I can say about as far as the ending is concerned, is that Toad does make up for what he did wrong. And then it's sort of like an ending of everything is fine now. You know, the main conflict was just dealing with the weasels, and since that's out of the way, Toad can make things right again, and it's all good. In the Disney version, that kind of plays out again too. You know, like the happily ever after, you know, Disney-esque type ending. While at the same time, in the Disney version, it kind of addresses the fact that Toad is still, you know, Toad's still going to be Toad, and he's still going to go off, and he's still going to do things, and this is really played out for humor, and I think is well done in the Disney version. But that's basically the two in a nutshell, from what I can explain. The original work focuses on more different plot points and things that lead Toad into a conflict, and then how he gets out of the conflict, and how the characters play into that. And in the Disney version, it's more based upon a specific event, which is the trial, where there is this deed, and this deed kind of is a main plot point, and what leads Toad and his friends into the conflict and out of the conflict. So that's basically the most important thing to, I think, understand out of the two different versions. So that's basically The Wind in the Willows, which is the Mr. Toad part of The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. And this book is written by Kenneth Graham. And there's also some independent short stories that do follow these characters, like Mr. Toad, the Rat, Ratty, Mole, and Badger. And these short stories include Duelist, Dome, The Ripper at the Gates of Dawn, and Wayfarers All. So, and these focus on like different stories. So, and those are independent. These have nothing to do really with The Wind in the Willows, as far as plot goes, but the characters are the same. So yes, so that's basically the original work of The Wind in the Willows, which is the Mr. Toad part of The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. Now, the next version, which is The Adventures of Ichabod, that other part of the Disney title, is based upon The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and which is a short story which is written by Washington Irving, which I mentioned earlier. And basically this one, like if you think that, the Tim Burton version or the other versions of Sleepy Hollow are more accurate, I'd say Disney probably did a very accurate, very clear, similar interpretation of this particular short story, because it pretty much plays out the same way. It's very clear that everything that's really presented in the Disney version coincides with a lot of what was in the original work. Which is surprising, because you'd think that it wouldn't be. You'd think that Disney just kind of took whatever bits and pieces of it and decided, yeah, that's what we're going to do. But for the most part, it's very, very similar. Very, very the same. Ichabod is kind of that same anti-hero. Brom Bones, that kind of same character. Katrina Van Tassel's kind of same character. Same story, same plot points, for the most part. there was a little bit of differences that I could catch, but for the most broadest of spectrums, this is a lot more of a similar interpretation than The Wind in the Willows, because Wind in the Willows is completely different than to the Disney version. But in this one, it's a lot more concise. The two are more tied together. Now, as far as plot goes, the plot follows Ichabod, who is a schoolmaster who comes to town from Connecticut, which basically plays out in the Disney version. You know, they describe him in sort of the same way that the book does. And the reason why I say he's kind of an anti-hero is because he's not really the most, I guess, high-level to people that we would look up to as maybe like a role model or something. He's kind of sleazy, let's just say that. You know, he basically comes into town, and the Disney version, as well as the original work, emphasize the point that he comes to town to be a schoolmaster, and being a schoolmaster, he doesn't really do things for his pupils. He does it for his own self. He's kind of very selfish in that respect. So again, both versions emphasize this point, and they emphasize this point that he's kind of, I mean, I think Disney plays up more of like the idea that the town sees him as like this magnificent thing, or like all the women fawn over him and stuff like that. I mean, I don't think really the original work focuses more on like everybody like being like, oh my gosh, this man is amazing. You know, in the Disney version, it really plays up to that, which is really funny because he's not really the greatest of guys. I mean, he's not good looking. He doesn't really have anything to offer. But the way that they see him is just like, so they see him in the town, they see him as such a dreamboat and so iconic that you just can't help but laugh. And I think the Disney version plays it up more for laughs. I mean, I think this is a very kind of a laughable interpretation compared to maybe the original work for the most part, I guess what I can say. So yes, Ichabod is kind of like this anti-hero. He's not really supposed to be the protagonist so much as he is a figure that, you know, is just kind of basically wants to do things for himself. I think that the big main flaw that he has is his selfishness. At one point, you know, when he encounters Katrina Van Tassel, who happens to be the daughter of the most richest farmer in all of the area, he instantly falls for her, and he kind of, you know, it's emphasized in the Disney version as well as in the original that he wants her for her money because the guy, or her father, is rich. So he clearly wants to have her for the money. And Disney version really plays this out like, you know, and it plays it out in such a funny way. I mean, I have to say, like, this particular version is hilarious. I mean, just the characters' expressions and emotions that Disney gets out of, they really do like play it up for laughs. They really do try to make Ichabod look like this really like just selfish, you know, person who kind of is winning for the most part. They really do play up in the Disney version that he's kind of winning. That Brom, yes, which is another character, which again is a guy who's kind of the town hero, you know, he's liked by everybody, and he wants to have Katrina. So they're kind of in this like little love triangle and competing, and Disney does this more in like, I think, a comedic, funny sort of way. I think in the original work, it may be, I guess it could be said it's done that way, but I think Disney more emphasizes the funniness of it and the absurdity, and tries to get some slapstick and, you know, try to make it, you know, just humorous. And I think that the Disney version does that very well in making it really funny. You know, what Ichabod does, and like how he uses kind of his intelligence to like outwit like Brom Bone and stuff. It's pretty hilarious in the Disney version. In the original work, it's sort of like just a kind of a competition of just wits, and you know, how it's more played out how would probably be in real life, as opposed to the Disney version, which is very, very comedical and out there. So yes, there's that. And again, Bombone is kind of seen as the guy who's just, you know, I mean, he's good looking, and he has, you know, that kind of, I guess, gentleman quality. But again, the Disney version doesn't really make it clear whether Katrina like really likes. I mean, it's kind of made clear that even when Bombone tries to, you know, be with her, she still has like, you know, Ichabod, and she kind of tries to, you know, and Disney does this more with motions and movement and expressions, because a lot of it's done through mime. Unlike the Toad story, where there was a lot of dialogue, in this particular one, there's not really a lot of dialogue in it. So it's very like mimey, and the way that she kind of portrays herself in the Disney version is that she does favor Ichabod. In the original work, it's really not made clear. It's kind of like that they say, you know, she maybe was using him in a way so she could like get closer, I guess, to Brombone or Brom. Brombone's like the longer version of the name, but the original work kind of maybe hints at that. But in the Disney version, for the most part, I think she kind of just, you know, really likes Ichabod for some reason, and we really don't know why that reason is, because again, he doesn't really have anything to offer, which makes it hilarious. The fact that all these people just like gloat over him and like he's the greatest thing, and it's just so amusing because you don't see anything special about him. And it's just so funny to see Brombone trying to compete with that. So yeah, it's that kind of stuff that's really emphasized in the Disney version. But I think in the original work they kind of play it more like they would in the, you know, 18th century style, instead of, you know, comedic 1940s/50s Disney style. So there's that. Some other differences that I noticed is that in the Disney version, it doesn't really explain who the Headless Horseman is. Brombone tells the story, which again is the same thing in the original work. And it is explained that the Headless Horseman is a Hessian trooper whose head was shot off at the by a stray of cannonballs during some nameless battle of the American Revolutionary War. And that's basically how they tell the story, or like the myth surrounding it. In the Disney version, it doesn't really explain what the myth is. They just say, oh yeah, there's just this guy who comes around and chops heads off. And the interesting thing that I found is that the Disney version doesn't really emphasize, you know, who the Headless Horseman is. It kind of just leaves it really open to interpretation. The original work sort of implies that it could have been Brom. It emphasizes the point that it could have been him. Like, it gives you, like, maybe hints that maybe it is him because of, you know, his reactions. But those reactions could be just a coincidence. But they do try to maybe make the correlation that, could be a possibility. You know, just kind of wink at the audience a little bit. And again, it's similar in the Disney version where, you know, when Ichabod is invited to the party, which you will see if you choose to watch the Disney version or read up on the original. He does get invited to like a party where Katrina is going to be there, and they have like this dance, and then like there's the whole the love triangle ensuing, and then and you also get to see, that there's a huge point in the Disney version of how Ichabod loves to eat. And how he just likes to eat, but he's just like this really skinny. and in the original work, it kind of does put that in there, but I think Disney does it more, again, for like the laugh effect, like he's just this long, skinny guy, but then he likes to eat like a ton. And in the original, it does mention that Ichabod is kind of superstitious about certain things, and maybe a little bit paranoid about certain tales and things like that. But for the most part, he participates and he tells stories too in the original work. In the Disney version, he doesn't really tell story. He just sits back and listens to everybody else. And him sitting back and listening to everybody else in the Disney version causes him to feel intimidated and scared. In the original work, he doesn't seem really scared when Von Braun tells this whole story of the Headless Horseman. He kind of just goes, yeah, okay. It's not until he goes into the woods that he starts to really get scared. And he everything seems to come back to him, and then he just freaks out. And again, it's similar in the fact that the Disney version does show the Headless Horseman throwing his pumpkin head at Ichabod once he crosses the bridge, and how there's there's this kind of mystery behind that. If you read up on the original as well as the Disney work, it does emphasize that there is still that kind of mystery, and that mystery ends up resulting in, both versions end up resulting in the same thing. It's pretty much a very, very, very close interpretation, for the most part, the Disney version, compared to the original. But I think it just takes a different tone. I think the original work was just trying to play out the whole idea of having this anti-hero. But I don't really know if it's really, when I was just reading up on it, it didn't seem like it was trying to be comedical or really funny. It was just kind of trying to, address this kind of rivalry and, how Ichabod's flaws end up biting him, sort of thing. Whereas Disney, it just plays up it so comedically, and the timing is perfect. I mean, the slapstick for this is hilarious. I think it's some of the Disney's best slapstick, for the most part. So, again, Disney tries to go with this more comedical effect, I think, than in the original tale. And what I found just fascinating is just how they were able to make it in such a sort of a shorter story. But not always the Disney version is done for laughs. Like the ending scenes, like how it transitions from this really funny-esque story and how it becomes very terrifying is really, I think, well done by Disney. And I really, really enjoyed The Headless Horseman. If you watch the Disney version, you will see the Headless Horseman coming, and his laugh is just, so cool. I mean, I just love that laugh. And I think he's the only Disney villain that I think can make purple look awesome. I mean, he is kind of wearing this purple-esque style cape, and it's very hilarious just to see him on this really black horse and just have this big kind of machete-like sword, and he's just going at it, trying to go after Ichabod. It's really it is hilarious at times, but it can also be intimidating and scary. But I think that was really the point of what Walt was trying to make, is that, you know, you can look at things and you can laugh at the fact that you're scared. It's mixing humor with scariness. But for the most part, I wasn't really scared of it. I think more the younger generation kids will be a little bit more frightened by it than me being a 20-year-old. But for the most part, it can be intimidating at times, especially when I first saw it, because I was like, whoa, when is it going to come? And, you know, it has like that effect on you the first time around when you see it. So if you have not seen this original work, or the Disney version, I encourage you to look it up. And I will put a link to it so you can watch it, because it is I think it is a really, really good, good interpretation of this particular story. And I like how Walt kind of combines this humor as well as with this whole point of, you know, that there's things also that are important, and those things being that you can mix humor with scariness and intimidation, and you can get something, you know, something really cool out of it. And for the most part, I thought it was a really, really well done job. I really enjoyed this one. It's probably one of my favorite Disney shorts. Like, it's one of those ones, or, I mean, the two of them combined together, both the Mr. Toad and both Ichabod, because they're both a lot of fun. And it was interesting to read up on the original works as well, because, I mean, again, for the most part, it's funny how Disney just decided to completely kind of rewrite the Wind in the Willows, but then stay with everything that was in The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. But for the most part, I really enjoyed it. And I really enjoy both versions of each of these tales. I will put links to everything that I've been discussing in this video. But, yeah, I think for the most part, check out both of each of the versions. I think they're both cool to read up on, to educate yourself, and it's really nice to watch the Disney version and kind of laugh at it, because they do really try to up the humor in both of these works, not just in the Ichabod short, but as well as the Mr. Toad short. So for the most part, I really enjoyed it. I hope people take it into consideration, at least trying to maybe read up on, you know, the Ichabod story, as well as the Wind in the Willows, or the Sleepy Hollow story, as well as the Wind in the Willows. But the Wind and the Willows, I believe, or the Wind in the Willows. I keep forgetting. I should check real quick. The Wind in the Willows, yes. Those are the two different works, and it's emphasized when the reader brings them up. But it's funny because they still have their own, Disney still has their own uniqueness. They don't really take everything from their source material. So for the most part, I can say both versions of each tale are worth looking into. And yeah, I think that's really all I can say about both of them. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, more than happy to answer them. And until next time, bye-bye, everybody. Because, man, I'm getting out of here. Love that ending. If you don't know, the ending of the Disney version, they do have a point where the narrator kind of says that line, and it's, for some reason, it cracks me up every time he says it. But like he says, man, I'm just getting out of here because I have nothing more to say. But either way, it's still fun to reference that at times, because I mean, sometimes even when I look at a story, or, you know, I just kind of want to stop reading, or afterwards I'm just like, don't shove it in my face anymore. But again, something worth mentioning, and, you know, something humorous that Disney has to offer. But again, that's all I can really say, and that was that reference, and man, I'm getting out of here. Bye-bye.